So trying to stay away from the funny puns on this one.
Go ahead. Just get it out of your system.
Okay, stay out of my breeches.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Help Me with HIPAA. I appreciate everyone listening. Today, we are going to cover breach response plans. A breach response plan is a required element of your compliance program since HITECH became effective. So joining us, as always, is Donna Grindle from Kardon Compliance. Hi, Donna.
Hi, David.
Are you doing okay?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. And you?
I am great. As we're doing this, we're going into the 4th of July weekend, so it's pretty exciting. Everybody else is off today, and we're working.
Well, and then you're sharing how far the delay is on our release schedule, but we're committed. We're here.
Yeah, that just means we have so many things going on, so that's
awesome.
Just means we're busy. We're busy, so that's great. So breach response plans, we get a ton of questions around breach response and breaches and what to do with them. So you actually thought it would be a great idea to kind of jump into that, and I agree. So the first thing that we needed, I know I'm so trying to stay away from the funny puns on this one.
Go ahead, just get it out of your system.
Okay, stay out of my breeches. Oh, God, I can't.
You won't be able to get it. It'll happen. Sorry, listeners. It's going to happen again. He can't control himself.
I can't. Yeah. So the first thing we need to do in doing the breach response plan is actually establishing that incident response capacity and capability within your organization. So before I go off on some other crazy, funny rant, I'll let Donna speak to that piece on creating the response policy and plan.
Well, thank you for controlling yourself a little bit more than I had been concerned about.
Too much coffee.
Oh, no. So the breach rule was added under HITECH just in case anybody needs that little piece of information. So that's why some people don't realize that it requires additional activity besides just knowing that you're supposed to do patient notifications. And OCR pointed to yet again another NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology. They release all kinds of documents that define how things are recommendations, or at least something for you to use as a guide. And they have a computer security incident handling guide. Sounds like exciting reading, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like...
I have one in my bathroom.
Yeah. You read it to the kids every night.
It puts them to sleep pretty quick.
At any rate, within that guide, it starts off by defining what your incident response capability, what you should include in your plan, what you need to have in your organization, preparing yourself for some sort of security breach or computer incident, as it calls it. And so I thought, since I made David talk about this one again, I'm making him talk about things, this would be a great time to just go through the elements that is it's required to have a plan and the recommended elements in your plan. Let's call it that way. So from our NIST document, and if you want to get the document yourself, you can go to the website, the show notes. There's a link to it in the show notes. So you have to start with a policy and plan. You have to have one. And it is required under the breach response, or the breach rule rather, that you have a written policy and procedure. And we know that OCR is taking this seriously when they released the APDerm Resolution Agreement, which that link is also on the website in the show notes. You can read it for yourself, but one of the things that they mention as part of that $150,000 fine they levied, along with a corrective action plan was that while they did the notification, it seems that they did do the notification properly. They had no written plan. So they were figuring it out as they went and nothing for them to follow and know exactly what they're supposed to do in advance. And that is clear that they're going to expect you to have that written down and thought through and planned out. So start with writing something down. So there you go. Write something down. We will have a breach response team. And most people say, well, there's only, so many of us that'll be involved. Great. You got to write it down. So, David, how many people are on your breach response team?
So, not counting my dog, it would be me.
And me.
And me. And you.
Yeah, because you're calling me, right?
Yeah. So, I've told my employees, it's throw it all at me and I'll get myself and I use Kardon Compliance for my other things around compliance within my business as well as my clients. So you're definitely, Kardon Compliance is definitely in my breach plan. Pick up the phone, start screaming.
Yes, my written plan says pick up the phone and we all freak out together.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So even a small company, and that was kind of what I was trying to allude to there, a small company has to have it written down what their plan is. Now, David's is brief. It's pretty straightforward. We all freak out together and, call Donna and, no matter where she is, she needs to pay attention to me. But having the plan is first step is just simply to write down that you're going to have one, have that documentation that says we're going to have a breach response team. And yes, in most small organizations, the breach response team is going to involve the exact same people that are in charge of everything else with their HIPAA compliance program, whether it's the business owners and the physician owners or the administrators. And of course, your compliance officers somewhere are going to be involved in that process. So start with, we're going to write down the fact that we have a policy that says we will maintain a breach response team. Step number one. And the policy doesn't have to include what the plan is. The policy just needs to say you're going to define, according to recommendations from OCR and NIST, a reasonable and appropriate breach response plan for your environment. That's step one. Step two would be actually developing that plan. I know, shocking as it is, that would be step two. So, developing the plan, that's a fun part, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where people typically drop the ball, is because that's when the big work comes into play, right? Yeah. That's when you have to sit down and document everything. And I don't know, I think that people make it sometimes more difficult than it has to be. I know within my environment, as well as even some of my clients, it doesn't take a 20-page document to do this. I mean, it's really kind of cut and dry, like you said earlier. You just put the information in that this is the policy or the procedure we're going to follow and just get it done. It doesn't really require you to spend, an entire 8-hour day doing this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's something that it should be easy in a small organization, much easier than in a larger one. Yet the smaller organizations often just shut down because they don't know how to go about it. And that's why we're doing this episode. Defining your procedures, you're going to need to develop all of the different information that you want to have in one place. That's the biggest key, is your plan. You just put all the information you would need in the event of a breach in one place so that you are able to go and say, what's the law say? Well, most people aren't like David and I, who we're dealing with it every day, so we know a lot of that information right off the top of our heads, which is why people call us. But you may not know that, and the entire team will probably not know that. So part of your plan, go ahead and document what are the requirements so that it's easy. It's in one place. You pull the plan, everything's there. Who's going to be your go-to team? You define that team who is going to handle the forensics and all of the other things that need to take place. But it's key that everyone in your organization knows who is going to be notified. I'm going to send it up the chain. I'm going to notify somebody. I can do it anonymously. You're supposed to allow people to do that. So any way that the data comes in, information that there may be an incident that needs to be investigated, that's going to trigger a certain number of people. And whether it's a small incident that only triggers a few people on your response team, or a larger incident where everybody gets into the quote-unquote war room, it's something that you have to define. How are we going to respond to both? Small, large, odd, bring in everybody in the whole company because there's only 4 of you. That's the way, some people have to look at it. So once you do that, everybody needs a job, right? Because you don't want to be on the team and sit on the bench.
No, we want everybody freaking out together.
That's right. That's our rule when it comes to a breach. So one of the things that you then do is assign who's going to be responsible for all the different pieces of the breach response plan. So you need to have somebody that's going to say, all right, who's responsible for the technical parts of doing the analysis and defining how many people were involved, what PHI was involved, all of those kind of things. So generally, you're going to have technical people either on your team, and you can bring in and you can say, our team includes our IT company. Because I've outsourced IT, our IT company is part of our team, and make that part of your plan. Then you can say they're in charge of making sure that happens. But ultimately, there's always someone responsible for the entire breach team. So you create this hierarchy, the buck stop here kind of thing, and you can have someone that's not necessarily a technical person responsible for making sure the technical things take place. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of areas do you need? Well, when I told somebody that it was a business associate, I told them that they needed to know who was going to handle the public relations. And they're like, well, we don't have to talk to anybody. And I was like, okay, let's assume the adage that it's not if it happens, it's when it happens. So it happens to you, and you think when you notify all of your covered entities, you're not going to need to talk to the press. You're not going to need to have someone deliver a consistent message to all of your covered entities. Oh, yeah. Because that's going to be critical to damage control, managing your message. So all of us need to understand that you're going to need to talk to either your patients or your business associates, your covered entities. You're going to need to talk to the press. We even have cases where, the TV crew shows up at a client site. Who does what? Who makes those decisions? If somebody at the front desk is sitting there and this TV crew shows up, they should kind of know what to do. You don't want them figuring it out or making a statement that puts you on the news with the message of whoever happened to be there when they walked in, right?
Now, when you're building this team out, can you also have people that you're not using on an ongoing basis that you bring in just for the response?
Right. That's part of the plan, is to say we're going to have this relationship where we know this is who we're going to call, and they know this is who we're going to call. And that is exactly the way that you put it into the plan, and you just make sure, okay, I've confirmed this with such and such. We have a plan in place, yada, yada, yada.
Okay. So if you're going to use a certain PR firm or an attorney or something like that, you just put that in your plan that's who you're going to call to activate them and get them involved in what's going on.
Correct. So you certainly want to make sure you have a tight relationship with your IT firm if you have outsourced it, clearly. But when it comes to public relations and then legal, you need to know what attorney you can talk to that has a clue what you need to, say or handle from a legal perspective with your customers and your patients. Now, sometimes you bring in a HIPAA attorney and all they do is give you the same list that we would give you, and it has happened. But in other cases, it's very complicated and a complex scenario where you have to deal with a very specific situation. So, for example, there was a case in, I believe, Connecticut, where the state Supreme Court just made a ruling in this particular case that said an individual can sue a provider while HIPAA law itself doesn't allow you to sue somebody. You can define HIPAA as a standard of care, which says I should be doing all of these things, and if I'm not doing these things, then it's a standard of care I'm not following, and clearly then I can sue you for not following the standard of care. What's understood is that. And that's what the Supreme Court said. So it's opened up the door now for people to sue for HIPAA breaches where they never had been able to before, which is interesting how it's going to change the landscape, and most people don't understand it. But the key scenario here was a single patient who was pregnant, and specific instructions were not to release any information whatsoever about her care to the father of the child. Okay? And they were in a heated lawsuit, the two of them, and the attorney for the father subpoenaed the medical records, right? So now you've got a scenario where you've got an individual who has specifically told you not to release this information to the individual who's now got a subpoena against you to give it to him. So what do you do, David?
Freak out.
You
don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't. Well, you don't do it.
Yeah. What they did that was wrong, because they didn't take the time to see what they're supposed to do, what they did was they released the information. Well, they had strict requirements, that was clear on file not to release it. And their argument was, well, it was subpoenaed. Had they notified the patient, then the patient would have had an opportunity for their attorneys to block the subpoena.
Mm-hmm.
They never notified the patient until after the information had already gotten there and the patient learned the hard way. That patient sued the physician's office because they failed to protect her privacy. And that is essentially defining that the privacy requirements that HIPAA says you're supposed to follow, there was a breach of her privacy. And because they handled it improperly, they are going to pay a lot of money probably.
And this is a breach of just one person, not 500 or more.
Right.
Right.
So it can be very complicated even for single ones. And most breaches only involve a handful of patients, one or two.
Mm-hmm.
We always hear about the big ones, but there are constantly issues that come into us. It's one patient. And
and there's tons of them that you don't hear about.
Yeah.
I mean, even some that are local, like we've talked about it here recently, where I got a breach response letter in the mail because my information was stolen from a local breach that happened with a local ambulance service. It's probably not something you'll ever hear outside of, our area. So I imagine that happens throughout the United States on a daily basis.
Yeah, the small ones that don't make big news, but we'll learn about it when the OCR settlement comes through.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, come on, that scenario, the safe wasn't safe.
Mm-hmm.
That they had it in a safe and it's missing from a safe. Wow. And you think, okay, this data's not encrypted on this hard drive and it's like really old and I'm going to put it in this safe and then it's taken from the safe. That, who would have thunk it, So you need to look at those weird scenarios and then put them into how your plan would respond to them. So if you have anything strange, it needs to go to someone who's making a decision before it becomes a breach of your obligation to protect that patient information. So your breach response plan, of course, is how you respond when something occurs if all of the things you have in place fail. So you should have all these other things in place.
Mhm.
And knowing that you have to, if it's over 500 patients in a jurisdiction, then you have to notify HHS in 60 days. You have to notify the patients within 60 days. And it's your obligation to make sure that every individual is notified. So you have to prove that you did everything in your power to make sure they knew what happened. So even if you lost track of them, you have to prove you did everything in your power to notify them. And those requirements also say that you have to do a 800 number where people can call and basically yell at you, and you have to take it. So your plan has to say, how am I going to implement all of that stuff? I've got to put it on my website. I've got to get an 800 number. I've got to do X, Y, and Z. There's so many things I have to do. Then if I don't have a plan where I easily pull that plan and I say, here's my regional OCR number. Here is the attorney, our malpractice attorney who's going to handle this, all of their phone numbers. Here's the people that we have already spoken to about handling our PR. So you know exactly who to activate based on the scenario.
Mhm.
Super twin powers, activate.
So it would be probably prudent to have maybe like a mock breach so that they could kind of follow through the process and see where the holes are before something like that happens.
Well, actually, you're supposed to have training for the breach response team.
Aha. So let's talk about that.
Aha. So you can approach it several different ways, but one of the best things that is successful and highly recommended is you bring together your breach team from time to time and you role play and take a scenario has occurred and how will I respond? I mean, that's what you always hear about emergency response people doing, right? I mean, you know about that.
Yeah.
So you have those emergency response training, they send it in the news. When you see people coming out looking bloody from the courthouse, it's a training thing. No one's been blown up, So it's the same kind of scenario where everybody's pulled in and you say, who do we call here? How would we handle this? What would we do here? And over time, you will fill in the gaps of the documentation that you need in your plan. And I've done it before where I go in with a breach response team and I say, okay, you got a call today and this is what happened. And then I sit quietly.
and so does everybody else.
Yeah, they're like, so what do you do?
We call when you take the day off.
Mm-hmm. And another really important thing that many people tell me, I'm a business associate, so I don't need to have a breach response plan.
Oh, okay.
That is wrong. It's wrong in many ways because, you can read the law a lot of different ways and decide, well, legally I don't have to have it. But here's the key is that covered entities can tell you that you need to do the response. They're allowed to put it back on you instead of doing it themselves. And I was actually reviewing a business associate agreement just the other day, and the covered entity, which is a large covered entity, in their business associate agreement says, if there is a breach, you notify us, but you're responsible. You have to do the notifications. You are responsible for every part of the breach response plan. And all you do for us is let us know it happened.
Wow. I wouldn't sign that.
It was already signed. And it's one of those cases where, the big company says this is what you're going to do. And the little company says, well, I'm blown out of the water if I don't do what you want. And there's not a lot of wiggle room to negotiate it. But even on the HHS reporting tool now, you say, am I reporting as a covered entity or am I reporting as a business associate? And it gives you different prompts based on what you're saying. So don't think that just because I'm a business associate, I don't need to do this.
Right.
Yeah. Don't tell me I'm not going to need a PR firm. I promise you, if it happens and it's big, you will. I'll go back to the Stanford case. I think this is going to be the case that will make it very, very clear how OCR is going to treat business associates due to that one case where, it's the whatever it is, the Help Me With Your Homework site's what I call it. I know it's got it. It was 2 business associates away. So it was Stanford University and their collections firm and then a consulting firm. And that collections firm and the consulting firm, they're the ones that are taking the hit. They're the ones that are, in the California civil suit paying $1.6 million, actually $1,650,000 each so far. That's where I always say, at that point, I would live in Mexico. My name would be Consuelo, and I'm here to help you today. Taking your order.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah.
Not the breach, but the Consuelo part.
Yeah, it would be really bad.
So, I guess to summarize today's podcast, we learned first we have to create the policy and procedure. We have to develop a team. We have to give each person on that team a job and tell them what they're going to be doing as part of their response. Establish relationships and lines of communication with people in that team and external people, IT or public relations or a law firm or whatever that might be, law enforcement agencies even. Determine the services that are involved around that response that you need and bring the staffing in to do training and mock responses around that. So all that would detail out a really good breach response plan.
You've been listening to the Help Me With HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.